Picture killing a large animal, more meat than one family could possibly eat in a single day. No refrigerator, no freezer, not even ice, most of the year, in most parts of the world. Within days, without doing anything about it, that entire animal would rot, uneaten, wasted, gone. And yet humans didn't just lose most of their food to spoilage for hundreds of thousands of years. They built an entire hidden science around stopping it, long before anyone understood a single thing about bacteria. So how did humans actually keep food edible, sometimes for months at a time, without any form of mechanical cooling at all? The answer starts with a question almost nobody asks. What actually makes food go bad in the first place? Spoilage. Bacteria, mold, and enzymes breaking food down, usually accelerated by exactly two things: moisture and warmth. And that single fact, discovered entirely through trial and error, became the foundation for almost every food preservation method humans would ever invent. Remove the moisture, or remove the warmth. Every solution in this story is really just a different way of attacking one of those two things. And the very first method humans landed on attacked moisture directly. Drying. Meat, fish, and fruit, cut into thin strips or slices and left exposed to sun, wind, or a low fire, lose most of their internal water content. Without that moisture, the bacteria and mold responsible for decay simply can't survive. What's left behind is lightweight, incredibly stable, and can last for months instead of days. This is where an early version of something you've probably eaten shows up. Dried, pounded strips of meat, sometimes preserved further with rendered fat and dried berries mixed in, became a survival staple across multiple cultures independently, most famously pemmican, developed by indigenous peoples across North America, a dense, calorie-packed food that could be carried for weeks without spoiling, engineered centuries before anyone used the word nutrition. But drying alone had a limit. It worked well in dry, sunny, or windy climates. In humid environments, meat left out to dry didn't dehydrate fast enough. It rotted first. So a second method developed, one that attacked spoilage from a completely different angle. Smoke. Meat and fish hung over a low, steady fire absorbed heat and chemical compounds from the smoke itself, drying the food while simultaneously coating it in natural antibacterial compounds. Smoking didn't just preserve food, it created flavor as a side effect, which is exactly why smoked meat and fish are still popular today, thousands of years after the practical need for it in many households has disappeared. And this is where the story splits into a direction almost nobody expects, because a completely different civilization, with zero contact with the cultures using smoke or sun drying, arrived at a third method entirely. Salt. Salt physically pulls moisture out of food through a process called osmosis, creating an environment where bacteria simply cannot survive. Salted meat and fish appear independently across ancient Egypt, China, and Northern Europe, each culture discovering, entirely on its own, that packing food in salt could keep it edible for months. Salt became so valuable in some of these societies that it functioned almost like currency. Roman soldiers were, according to some historical accounts, partially paid in salt, which is actually where the word salary originally comes from, salt being worth literally as much as the ability to preserve your food supply through an entire winter. 3 completely different regions, 3 completely different climates, all discovering that pulling water out of food, whether through sun, smoke, or salt, was the key to stopping it from rotting. But drying, smoking, and salting only solved half the puzzle. There was a second entire category of preservation, one that didn't remove moisture at all. It used it. Fermentation. This is genuinely strange when you think about it. Instead of stopping bacteria from growing, fermentation deliberately introduces specific, beneficial bacteria or fungi into food, ones that outcompete the harmful bacteria responsible for spoilage, while also producing acid or alcohol that makes the environment hostile to anything dangerous. In East Asia, vegetables packed in salt and left to ferment naturally became kimchi and various pickled preparations, some traced back thousands of years, capable of lasting through an entire winter buried underground in sealed clay jars. In Europe, a nearly identical process using cabbage produced sauerkraut, discovered independently, using the exact same core bacterial science, centuries before anyone understood what a bacterium even was. Milk, another naturally short-lived food, underwent its own version of this same trick. Left to ferment under the right conditions, milk transforms into yogurt or cheese, both of which last dramatically longer than fresh milk ever could, an ancient accident that different pastoral cultures across Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia all stumbled into on their own. Humans hadn't just learned to slow down decay. In fermentation, they'd learned to deliberately hijack it, turning the exact same biological process that ruins food into the very thing that saves it. But everything so far dealt with meat, fish, dairy, and vegetables individually. There was still a bigger problem waiting, an entire harvest's worth of grain, needing to last through months where nothing new could be grown at all. This is where storage itself, not just preservation technique, became critical. Grain silos and sealed underground pits, lined with clay, stone, or woven baskets coated in mud, protected harvested grain from moisture, pests, and temperature swings for months at a time. Archaeological sites across the ancient Middle East show enormous storage pits, some capable of holding grain for an entire community, evidence that food storage wasn't just a household task, it was a foundational piece of early civilization itself. Without reliable long-term grain storage, cities, with populations that couldn't hunt or farm daily for themselves, likely couldn't have existed at all. Meanwhile, an entirely different strategy was developing for something drying, smoking, and salting couldn't easily handle: fresh produce and dairy that needed to stay genuinely cold, not just dry. The root cellar. Digging storage space directly into the ground took advantage of something remarkably consistent. Underground temperatures stay significantly cooler and more stable than surface air, especially during summer months. Root vegetables, packed in dry sand or straw inside these cellars, could last for months, insulated from both heat and sudden temperature swings by the earth surrounding them on every side. But some cultures push this idea even further, into something that sounds almost impossible without modern technology: ice, stored deliberately, to last through summer. In ancient Persia, a genuinely remarkable structure called the yakshul, a large domed, thick-walled building, used evaporative cooling and clever airflow design to actually freeze water and store ice. In a desert climate, without any mechanical refrigeration whatsoever, ice harvested or created during cooler months could remain frozen inside these structures well into the heat of summer, used to preserve food and even make chilled desserts, in one of the hottest regions on the planet. In colder regions of Europe, North America, and Scandinavia, a simpler but related idea took hold: the ice house. Blocks of ice, cut directly from frozen lakes and rivers during winter, were packed tightly in sawdust or straw inside insulated underground or semi-underground structures. Sawdust, an otherwise useless waste product from lumber mills, turned out to be an excellent insulator. An ice pack this way could genuinely last through an entire summer, sometimes even longer. And this eventually grew into something almost nobody expects: an actual global industry, built entirely around frozen water. In the 1800s, a businessman named Frederick Tudor, later nicknamed the Ice King, built a genuine international trade empire around harvesting ice from frozen New England lakes and shipping it, packed in sawdust, on wooden ships, to warm climates as far away as the Caribbean and even India. It sounds almost absurd, shipping frozen lake water across entire oceans, and much of it did melt in transit, but enough survived the journey to make it wildly profitable, creating one of the strangest, most genuinely global commodities in the history of food preservation, decades before mechanical refrigeration existed anywhere. By the mid to late 1800s, actual mechanical refrigeration began appearing, first in industrial settings like breweries and meatpacking plants, using compressors and refrigerants to create cold artificially instead of relying on harvested winter ice. This eventually shrank down, decade by decade, into the household refrigerator, a machine that finally did, automatically and continuously, what root cellars, ice houses, and yakshuls had been doing manually for centuries. Stop and compare these two realities for a second. An early human, salting strips of meat by hand, burying grain in a sealed clay-lined pit, or carefully packing winter ice into sawdust, hoping it would survive long enough to matter months later in the heat of summer. Today, you open a door, and cold air is simply there, instantly, continuously, with a compressor quietly running somewhere you never even think about. The core problem never actually changed across that entire span of time: food decays, and humans needed to buy themselves time against it. What changed was every single method built to do that: sun and wind pulling out moisture, smoke coating food and natural preservation, salt drawing water out through pure chemistry, fermentation turning decay into a defense, the earth itself used as a natural refrigerator, and finally, frozen lakes shipped across oceans just to keep something cold a little longer. Maybe that's the real thread running through this story. Long before anyone understood bacteria, or chemistry, or refrigeration as a science, humans had already quietly figured out almost every core principle behind keeping food safe, using nothing but sun, smoke, salt, ice, and the ground beneath their feet. If you found it interesting how humans solve something this essential using nothing but the natural world around them, watch the next video, where we trace how humans went from carrying water by hand to indoor plumbing.